All right, we are back with another iRacing officials guide on the Oval Series. This week we're going to be focusing on the NASCAR Next Gen at Martinsville. And usually that gets determined by a weekly poll. In my Discord, I was on vacation last week, so I missed last week getting one up, but at Talladega, I don't know if there's a whole lot I could show you anyways. In any case, we're at Martinsville this week, and if you want to get a jump start on your practicing, a great way to do that, as we talked about in the last one, was to go to the series that you're looking to practice for, click on schedule, and then you can actually test drive any one of these races, and it will mimic the track weather conditions that it will be for that official week. So if you do want to get a jump start, especially on a week like Talladega where you maybe don't want to hurt that safety rating or your I rating, you get a jump start on the following week by going through this test drive in the official series schedule and launch it from there. A couple things about Martinsville while it loads in here. For most of you are going to already know this, but just to go over it, kind of from the basics. Martinsville is going to be very bottom dominant, so you really want to protect that bottom line. I think that's going to be incredibly important, especially with the amount of cautions that usually come with Martinsville. I also want to say that you really want to prioritize your qualifying because with the minimal amount of green flag runs, it's going to be hard to make up that track position. Plus, sometimes if you're back farther in the pack, you can kind of just get trapped in a way where there's cars in front of you, cars to your outside. It makes it really difficult to sort of move forward. And also with lots of cautions means that there are wrecks. So the farther up you can qualify, the safer you're going to be, and kind of keep yourself out of trouble there. All right, so to just cover the qualifying session of the video here, we'll go ahead and start off by showing you the out of car view, and then I'll jump into an in car, show you the qualifying laps, and then we'll jump towards the end when I ran, laps with tires that were about, I don't know, 35 laps old, something around there, just so you can see that difference. There's really not going to be a ton of difference there, other than that the lap time is just going to be a little bit slower. But to go ahead and start, here is going to be the Garage 61, so you can sort of see the session details. We've got, I think it was 50% usage somewhere in there, 50% humidity, 6 mile per hour northwest, 71 air temp, 88 track temp at partly cloudy. And as you can see here, sim date time is going to be just based off of that schedule that we used from the official series and jumped right into, and my lap was a 18.987 for the qualifying lap. All right, looking at the qualifying lap, taking off from pit road here, like I talked about in the longer video, is that you really are going to throw away the first lap, or at least I felt like it took a little bit for the tires to heat up, probably because the speeds aren't too good. I even locked up a little bit there. So we're going to go ahead and just throw away this first lap, and then going in for our qualifying lap, you do want to run a little bit higher. I probably could have even jumped up another lane. And the reason for that is it's going to give you more speed down the straightaway to take the green flag for your quote-unquote heater lap. Coming into the corner, we start braking about, let's see here, right before this NASCAR sign on the left side here in the black paint. I like to kind of use it as a reference because you'll be sort of about halfway through it from the in-car view when it kind of crosses your A pillar, which is going to be that left pillar there from your windshield. And you'll see that when we run through the in-car view. But it looks like we're getting to about 75%, 70% brake pressure. Wrapping that bottom as best we can to launch off. Full throttle off, shifting into fourth. Shifting back down into third. Wrapping right around that bottom. And then launching off. You can even see I got a little bit loose there, so probably could even been a little bit quicker. But that is an 18.987 at Martinsville for your qualifying lap. And then I'm going to play it one more time without talking, just so you can sort of see it in real time. All right, and then we'll go it back again here. The cockpit view, full speed. And that is a qualifying lap at Martinsville. And real quick, I'll show you what I mean by the paint sign here on the left. You see how I'm not really getting on the brakes until right about here. So I'm about midway through this NASCAR sign on the inside wall here before I start getting on the brakes. If you do like brake markers, that's a good one to use here at Martinsville. And then for 3 and 4, it's going to be about when that wall on the inside ends for pit entry. Right there, I'm braking right when it's basically the end of the pit wall is blocked by this A pillar here as a braking reference for 3 and 4 here. Okay, well, I'm going to clip this into the video and hope you guys enjoy the rest of it as we kind of go through a race run. I'm basically just going to give tips on how to practice for it, what you're trying to do when you are practicing, and then, sort of just overall track tips that you hopefully will find helpful at Martinsville, and enjoy the rest of the video. So this week I would prioritize qualifying maybe more than you normally would, because I do think it's important. But in terms of how to set up your qualifying, let's go ahead and start with the car setup for qualifying and a race run. Few things here. I went over this in the last guide, but I'll go ahead and touch on it again just for anybody who's new to watching these videos. Starting with the things we can change in a fixed setup, it's going to be very minimal. It's pretty much just going to be this front end here. And first thing is going to be the steering pinion. How I like to describe this is if you've ever played a shooter, Halo, Call of Duty, Battlefield, anything like that, you can adjust your sensitivity of your crosshair. And that's pretty much how I look at the pinion or steering ratio. Some people like a more twitchy wheel with a faster response, or others, like maybe a little bit slower, where they feel like the wheel's a little bit looser and it's not so punishing in a sense. But here at Martinsville, I actually like to bump it up to 2.64. I feel like you have to turn the wheel a little too much in the corners at that 2.36. So 2.64 felt comfortable for me. But that doesn't mean that's the only way you can go. You can definitely run 2.36 and be just as fast if you feel more comfortable with that. Steering offset, I like a straight wheel. So for Martinsville this week, I'm going to put that about +3. And really what that does is changes, how straight the wheel is going down the corner. And what I mean by that is it doesn't mean that your wheels are going to be turned slightly as you're going straight. It really just means of how the wheel is sort of connected in a sense. So if I move it all the way up to the right, that's going to make it so the wheel is offset to the right going down the straightaway. So I'll have to turn a little bit when I'm driving straight to make sure that the car doesn't, veer to the right. Same applies if you go leftwards. That's going to move the wheel more towards the left. And maybe you'll find that more comfortable. Some people do like to mess with this offset where they're sort of having to turn some down the straight to keep the car moving straight. But then in the corners, they don't have to put as much wheel in because they've already offset that wheel. For the purposes of this and how I like to drive the car, I'm going to put it at +3 though, just so the wheel is straight going down the straightaways, and then I'll do all the turning in the corners. Master cylinders, I felt like these were fine. You are welcome to mess with these. but I'm going to leave it at that 2732 and then the 7/8 for the rear. Brake bias, we've sort of touched on this already in the last video and also in some of the guides in the Discord, but brake bias is really just going to affect your corner entry when you're on the brakes, and then a little bit of the middle of the corner if you are doing any trail braking. Moving it upwards is going to tighten up the car as you enter the corner, and moving it down is going to loosen it up. So if you feel like you're not getting enough rotation as you're going into the corner, move it down. If you feel like you're getting too much rotation, then move it up. It's kind of a quick and dirty rule for the brake bias. At a track like Martinsville, it's going to be really easy to lock up the fronts, so I like to move it down a little bit. And I'm going to land here all the way at the bottom at 45.4. During a race, you might want to put this maybe up towards the 46s, just to sort of protect those tires a little bit more. But for qualifying, I'm going to put it at 45.4 all the way as low as it goes. And then obviously, most of you, if not all, will probably have a brake bias adjustment set on your wheel, and you can make those adjustments on the fly as the race goes on. So click and apply to those settings. We'll go ahead and jump in for a little qualifying run, and then I'll just carry that through into what would be essentially a race stint. I'll probably do 20 or 30 laps, and then we can do a quick comparison of maybe how I'm driving the car for the qualifying lap versus when the tires are worn a little bit and what that difference may look like. Just getting in here, we're just kind of sending it in. I find that the second lap was the fastest, so I'm not going to care too much about my time here. Sort of just throwing it away for the real heater. We're going to send it up, get some extra speed, and then launch it off. And there you go, there's kind of a qualifying lap. Maybe there's a little bit more time there, but I just jumped into the session, started running the laps, and we ran at 18.987. And getting into how I'm actually running the lap, so you're going to be shifting down to third on both ends, and then shifting up to fourth down the straightaway, obviously, which means you're not going to be using your fifth gear at all throughout the whole race. Now, sort of how you want to attack Martinsville. As you can see, my lap time is a little off because I'm talking and not paying too much attention, but the core, I'd say, principles at Martinsville are going to be, one, you want to be smooth. You want to be smooth and you want to know how much you can brake. I think that's first and foremost the most important piece, because you do not want to be locking up, especially in a race. With you being side by side, if I lock up here and I go up the track, I'm going to knock the guy on the outside out of the way, and he's not going to be too happy with me, right? And the last thing we want is some payback, which is just going to ruin, both drivers' races, right? So that's the first thing I would say when you're going in for your practice. Just run laps. That's what I tell anybody in my coaching sessions. Just get out there, run some laps, 10, 20 laps until you really feel comfortable at the track and kind of how it flows, how the car feels. Then you can start making those little adjustments to it, whether that's the brake bias or the offset, pinion, those things we talked about in the beginning. And then once you've sort of determined that, then you can start running your qualifying runs. There's no point in just trying to find the edge when you're not even comfortable with the track in the beginning anyways. So go ahead, get comfortable, then start worrying about qualifying, and then sort of keep graduating from there into your race runs. Maybe I like to run usually a quick one and a long one, so maybe I'll run one that's 20 laps, so maybe there's a 20 lap shootout at the end, or a 10 lap shootout, and then the opposite, is there going to be a long 50 lap run. Maybe not so important at a track like Martinsville, because there usually are a lot of cautions, but it is good to get that practice either way. And in terms of your practice, one thing that I do want to note that some people seem to overlook is that when you are setting up a test session, you can use that schedule like I talked about earlier, But once you have an idea of what the session looks like, so like right now it's 88 track temp, 71 air temp, 50% humidity with a little bit of wind at 6 miles per hour. You then want to go in and create a practice session, or a test session I should say, for practicing based on those conditions, but you want to set the weather to static. I feel like that's very important, and the reason for that is because you don't want the track to change at all when you're practicing. That way, if you do comparisons, so say, you know, if we're doing that short run and we're going to do 15 laps, and you want to run 3 of them to see which one's faster, then you can do that because the conditions are not going to change. But in a you know, a test drive session like this, where the weather's, you know, constantly adapting to the real time of the sim, you know, it may get hotter as the run goes on, or it may get cooler. So if I do one session in the beginning of this, and then, you know, my third one, it's gotten hotter, so it's 90 or 91 degree track temp, you know, that's going to make a big difference. I think that's something that I didn't know right at the beginning of, you know, getting into iRacing, is how much the track temperature actually plays a factor. And even 1 degree of track temp can actually affect your lap by quite a bit, enough to, you know, throw you off a few positions, or throw off the comparisons that you might want to do from your sessions. Okay, and then getting back to, you know, kind of how you want to drive the track. So Martinsville, very flat, paperclip, is what they call it. I usually like to brake right for turn 1 and 2, right about when my A pillar, which is this bar on the left side, starts to get by that NASCAR sponsorship on the inner wall. And then same thing in turns 3 and 4. I like to use where the pit entrance starts. So let's look at it here up close. So you see that NASCAR sign right there on the left in black. When you're about halfway through it, you can hit your brakes, slow the car down, and then let it rip off. Same thing here. We got to that wall, where that wall ends, right before the pin entrance is. That's going to be a good marker. So for the, you know, those of you out there that do like a brake marker, that's a good one to use, I'd say. And then, you know, you can find, you know, the limit or your comfort zone within that. And then looking at how I'm sort of running the lap, you really just want to make sure you wrap that bottom. That's going to be the fastest way around here. You can push it a little bit on entry, but like I said, you really do want to find that edge of when the brakes are going to lock up. So then you're getting as much braking force as possible, but also not locking up the fronts and throwing away that lap or hitting the guy on your outside if there is one. Another thing I think a lot of people don't necessarily know that's a good tip is that when you're ever braking and shifting, you always want to kind of burp the throttle when you do it. If you see from my inputs here in the center of the screen, you can see that I'm feathering the throttle when I do shift down to third, and that's going to help keep the car a little bit more balanced. As you can see, there's not really any hiccup in the balance of the car when I go into the corner, but if I don't do it, let's see if you watch it here. Oh, let's see, it's just out of habit there. Let's try it again. If I'm braking, shifting down, you do have to put a little bit in there, but you want to kind of match what the revs are going to be, and that's going to keep the car stable under braking. And that goes for when you're racing at road courses with the next gen, anything like that. You do want to make sure you put in that little bit of throttle when you're downshifting, just to make sure the car is going to stay balanced through the corner for you. See, and then that time I overdid it. And if you overdo it, it's just going to completely destroy any kind of lap time that you were putting down. And then, like I said before, you might get into the car to your outside, and that's just going to cause even more trouble. Another thing I would like to point out when it comes to Martinsville is that with lots of cautions, there's going to be lots of restarts. So you're going to be either trapped on the bottom, trapped on the top, hopefully trapped on the bottom. But there are going to be times you're going to be sucked to the outside. It's just the way it is. So I do think it's important to get comfortable in both of those spots. Actually, I'll move the brake bias up a little bit here since we're on a little bit of a longer run. So what you can do is when you're practicing, maybe you're going to do those short runs, but you want to practice as if you're on the inside. So that's something that's a good practice tool, is work on being fast as if you're on the bottom the whole time. So leave that extra lane up there, go into your braking zones, find that, that comfort zone for you of where you can safely wrap around the track only using the bottom. And then you can do, 2 or 3 15-lap runs. Going to be pretty quick for you, but also really useful practice, and see if you can get that overall time down. So that's something important when you're practicing, is if unless you're practicing for a qualifying run, the most important thing is the total time that it takes you to complete those 15 laps, for example. It's not important if you ran your fastest lap in the second session if it's 30 seconds slower than your first session, right? You're really trying to minimize the total time it takes you to run 15, 20, 30 laps, whatever it is. That's really what practicing for a race run is. It has nothing to do with your fast lap. That's going to be practiced separately on the fresh tires, of course. So as you can see here, you might have to brake a little bit more if you're only running the inside. You also have to be careful on exit that you don't gas up too soon, because it's really easy to spin the car out on exit, especially when you're running the bottom. And then also what you can practice is running the outside lane. So that's going to be a lot less braking, and you can sort of just roll the center. And you can do that on the inside as well. But you're kind of just trying to carry as much speed around the outside. So I'm leaving him his lane on the inside there, getting off the corner, and then continuing to see what it feels like on this outside. Because like I said, this is not going to be a track that's going to single file out too often, unless there aren't that many cautions. But if you're starting in the back, you might have to go to the outside to make your passes. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. But like I talked about earlier, it does get where you get to a point where if you're towards the back of the field, it's going to be easy to feel trapped. You've got cars on your outside, on your inside, or maybe that guy in front of you is smart enough to really block that inside, so you're going to have to use the outside to get around him. Whoops, shot in there a little too hard there. So it is important to run both lanes. I think at Martinsville, more so than most tracks, just because you are going to be side by side with cars a lot, so you do want to be fast with both options, whether you're stuck on the outside here or if you're stuck on the inside. It's great to be fast when you have the whole track to use. So, like a qualifying run, I've got all this track that I can use for braking, for gassing off, all that kind of stuff is great. But if you don't get to use it for more than 25% of the race, then really how much does it really matter, right? Unless you're out in the lead, which if there's 25 cars in the field, only one of those 25 people is getting that freedom to use up the whole track. So make sure you do get comfortable with what lane you're running. Okay, I think that pretty much sums up Martinsville. So we'll go ahead and try and run a faster lap on what looks like, 30, 35 lap old tires. And see how it compares. So your braking point is going to be about the same, maybe a little earlier. You can see I'm about almost 2/10 off my time. Whoops, I hit the wall. We'll have to do another one. But I'm about 2 to 3/10 off my qualifying time, right off the go there. Part of that's going to be because of the launch I had from the outside. And I'd say about, the 10th of that 10th and a half there is all going to just be from the tire wear. But your braking points are going to be about the same. And if you find that your fronts are locking, you can move that bias down if you didn't start all the way at the bottom. But you can hear I'm kind of punishing those front tires a little more than I was. You can hear them skipping a little bit. So maybe I need to back it down just that slight bit earlier. Let it roll the bottom. You can see there I wasn't on the gas or the brake, because we're just letting the car float through the corner. And that pretty much sums up a run at Martinsville. I hope you guys found this helpful. Feel free to jump into the Discord and join us. I do try and put out reference guides on certain aspects of racing, whether it's, brake bias, tire saving, things like that. And then also you can subscribe to the YouTube for these videos. They're clearly not going to follow one specific series or track type. We're going to kind of jump around, which I think makes it more universal for different people to try different things. So yeah, I hope you guys found this helpful, and thank you for watching.